Murphy. I'm going to talk to you today about prototyping, about China, about your suppliers there and how you can better get the parts that you want from them, and how you can protect your IP while you're at it. So, in terms of prototypes, what kinds of prototypes and parts does it actually make sense to send to China? China is really good for mechanical and engineering parts and prototypes. The processes that China really kind of excels at are CNC machining and injection molding, where there's quite a lot of capacity and a great deal of skill and experience. The processes in terms of prototyping where China's maybe less good are 3D printing, and that's despite the emergence of several quite valid Chinese 3D printer manufacturers, and vacuum casting. So they're processes that maybe you would still be better off looking closer to home for. And then China. Why send parts to China? Why use China? I imagine most of you are already, but the kind of stock answer is because it's cheap. China's low cost. You can get things done there cheaper than you can at home. That is increasingly less true. China is no longer as cheap as it was. They've raised 600 million people out of poverty, and with that, obviously people's kind of living standards and expectations have risen with it, and the cost of making things in China is actually on the up, and the trend is continuing in that direction. Just to give you some numbers, 5 years ago the minimum wage in Shenzhen was 800 renminbi. It is 2,800 renminbi today. The British pound, when I first arrived in China 15 years ago, was £1 to 15 renminbi. It's today it's 1 to 8 or 9, and the cost of an apartment in the area where I live in Shenzhen is now more than the cost of a house in the area in the UK where I was born and grew up. So the cost of making things in China is no longer that cheap. It's still probably going to be cheaper than most other countries, but like I say, the trend is moving in that direction. So what are China's main advantages today? The main advantages for me of using China today are its speed and its versatility. China is incredibly fast and incredibly versatile. You can get things done in China very, very, very quickly, and you can get a lot of different processes done at one supplier, or they have a network of suppliers that can help you out. And there's a number of reasons for China being so kind of fast and versatile. First and foremost, just the sheer number of companies and manufacturers and suppliers that are there. And then you combine that with their kind of fierce work ethic. They work very, very hard, and whether that's bottom up, because they see quite a clear link between working hard and improving their kind of life, or whether it's top down, imposed by factory managers, bosses, etc., as is the kind of common conception in the rest of the world. They work very, very long hours, 6, sometimes 7 days a week. So obviously they can get a lot done. And then one thing that China does have that I think would be very difficult for the rest of the world to replicate anytime soon is they have a very entrepreneurial mindset. So they approach things in a kind of fail fast, fail often way, which enables them to move very quickly. That might not always be the best way of approaching everything and every project, but certainly for prototyping it seems to work quite well. So what about where China kind of falls down? What are the reasons not to use China? Well, China's not very good at high precision. There are a number of reasons for that again, one of which might be the aforementioned have-a-go mentality that kind of precludes a lot of the planning that you need to manufacture high precision parts. The equipment that they're using in many Chinese prototyping companies is second-rate Chinese manufactured machinery that's not really designed to hit high tolerances, and also the environments in which they work are not conducive to high tolerance parts. The tendency in China is to build up, so you might have a company on the 4th floor of a 6-story factory running 20 CNC machines, and you've got a lot of vibrations up there. So they really do struggle with high precision parts. Also, materials in China are an absolute nightmare, to be honest. The material supply chain for prototyping is very, very tricky to navigate. After 10 years, I still can't get my head around it. So if you need a specific grade of material, for example, then China is maybe not the best place for you. Throughout all of this, communication is absolutely essential between you and the supplier, just to make sure that everybody is making the exact same part, because they will quote anything you ask them to, essentially, and you need to check and double check that they're actually quoting for the same part and material as you actually want. So you've decided to work with China, as I'm sure many of you already are. How to then better ensure that you get a higher quality of part and have a better experience. With that, this is a 3-stage process, well actually a 4-stage process, but we couldn't find a picture. The first stage of the process is very much internal. So you need to clarify exactly what it is you want internally, and then you need to also clarify a kind of a range of acceptability, because you're never going to get exactly what you want. So you need to be pretty sure on what it is you want, and then what also you're able to accept outside of that. And then in terms of the 3 stages in China, you have to qualify the supplier, you have to qualify the quote and the process, and you also have to qualify the quality control. And really your communication and involvement at each of these stages is absolutely essential. So how best to qualify the suppliers? Well, I mean, obviously, if you're able to, the quickest and the easiest way to do that is to pay them a visit. You can very, very quickly see what they are doing themselves, what they're outsourcing, how they're handling materials, quality control, etc. And it's a great way to begin building a relationship, which is very, very important in China. Obviously, it's not always possible to do that, so where next? The website. You need to be very, very careful when looking at the website. Some of the best companies in China, some of the best manufacturers in China are very, very poor at marketing and communication. So they might have really terrible websites with that are very, very difficult to navigate, and it's not really clear what they are doing. And then the flip side of that is you get trade companies that a lot of their focus is on the sales and marketing aspects of it. So they will have a very slick presentation. But with a little bit of investigation, you can actually determine quite a lot from the website. So you need to be looking closely at the pictures. Do they look as though they've been taken in different locations? If so, they probably have. Is there quite a lot of information about one service, and then all of the other services that they claim to offer, there's not that much information? That's a clear indicator of what they actually do themselves. And the address, if it sounds like an office, then it probably is. And then following that, it's very, very important that you spend a little bit of time actually investigating the person that you'll be dealing with. A lot of the people that you'll be dealing with are English language graduates rather than engineering, people with engineering backgrounds. And in the kind of sales and marketing roles in China, within the first 2 years, there's a lot of staff turnover. And you get people jumping around from different industries, just trying this out and then trying that out. So with a quick check on LinkedIn, you can establish whether or not the person you're speaking to actually knows what they're talking about. and you can have a quick look. And anybody that's been in the company or the role for 3 years or more is probably a safe bet. Like they're going to be in it for the long term. And then following that, you have to be involved at the actual quote and during the manufacturing process. So here it's essential that you have an engineering drawing with very clear tolerances and any critical features marked on there that you might want. You need to send your requirements as clearly and concisely as possible, because you have to understand that the person you're speaking to, obviously English is not their first language, and they're probably not from an engineering background. So if you send a massive email, it's going to confuse them. All they're going to do is they're going to take your email, your requirements, and translate them for the estimating department or for the production department. So the clearer you make your requirements, the easier that job will be for them. And then you have to ask specific questions about anything that's important to you, about the part or about the project, just to clarify that that's actually been paid attention to, because the process in many Chinese companies is a bit similar to Chinese whispers, where the information gets passed from one person to another person to another person, and a lot is lost during that process. So anything that you're actually really kind of is crucial to your part, you need to be asking specific questions about that. And then during the actual manufacturing process, you also need to be asking for updates and pictures, just to make sure that things are going as they should be, really. And then following that, the QC stage, you have to ask for very detailed pictures. What they will often do is take a photo from 2 meters away of the parts, so that you can't really see anything at all. So you have to actually ask for some close-up pictures. You need to request QC reports, and then when you get a QC report, it's important to actually check that the tolerances that they're checking the parts to are your drawing tolerances, rather than their manufacturing tolerances. So throughout these 3 stages, a little bit of extra work on your side will result in a much better kind of process and a much better part. And then China obviously has an absolutely a terrible reputation in terms of IP protection, and a lot of that is founded, some of it is less so, and some of it is government sponsored, I believe. But as far as I'm concerned, some of the safer companies that you're going to work with in China in terms of IP protection are the prototyping companies, for 2 reasons. One, because their business is prototyping, and if they were stealing people's IP, they would be out of business fairly quickly. And the second reason is because their business is not your business. Even if they did steal your designs, or if they had intents in that direction, they wouldn't necessarily know what to do with them once they did. So, like I say, I think the prototyping companies you work with in China, in terms of IP protection, are fairly safe, but obviously caution is always recommended. So what are some of the things that you can do to ensure that you're protecting your IP when you're working with China? There's the NDA, the non-disclosure agreement, which is fairly standard for most companies. A lot of companies are using these, and you're going to send it through to the supplier. They're going to sign it, but they're more than likely not going to read it. Not because they don't want to, and not because they don't respect what you're trying to do, just because they can't really. It's 20-30 pages of legal language that even for most native speakers would be nonsense. So they're going to sign it, but what you need to do is you need to ensure that the person who does sign it is somebody who's actually got the authority to do that in the company. And then you also need to make sure that they stamp it with the company stamp. So the NDA. Also, if you're at the stage in your development where you think you could, and it's the part or component where you think you should, a patent might be a worthwhile investment. They're actually quite cheap and easy to obtain in China. There are companies that can help you throughout the whole process. And like I say, they're quite cheap. I don't know how much protection they will actually provide, but it's just an extra layer on top of the non-disclosure agreement. What are some of the other things that companies are doing in order to protect their IP? What a lot of companies do is they split the project up between suppliers, so no one supplier sees all of the parts. They will send out different packages to different suppliers. So like I say, no one supplier is then seeing all of the parts. Also, you should kind of refrain from sending assembly drawings unless absolutely necessary. Also, the CAD, you're better off not sending the actual kind of design files. Instead, send a generic file type like IGS or STP, something like that. And then essentially, the best thing you can do in China in order to ensure that you're going to get a better part and a better service is to build the relationship with the supplier. Make sure that you're more than just an email to them. Because if you actually find a good person in a good company, you will get a much better experience than a bad person in a good company. So if you invest the time to get to know the person, if you visit them, for example, if you allot a little extra time to allow them to take you to dinner, these are all things that help build a relationship. It's very important to the Chinese. Relationships are important the world over, but it's extremely important in China. And like I say, once you've started building a relationship with the supplier, you will have a much better experience, and it will help you in terms of protecting your IP. Essentially, that's all I've got. Has anyone got any questions?